On the eve of training camp, we are joined by the LA Kings insider Zach Dooley on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love you to leave us a positive comment on Apple Podcasts if you're a fan of the show. And we are on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network, also co-host of the Puck Podcast. It's a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the last 18 years and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get 3 weeks of a free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Well, the countdown to the NHL season obviously is underway. The Kings season opener is October 10th in Buffalo, 23 days away. Preseason opener, September 23rd, just 6 days away. And Kings training camp is 1 day away. To talk about that and more, we are happy to be joined once again by LA Kings insider Zach Dooley, manager of editorial content for the LA Kings. Zach, how you doing?
Eddie, I am doing great. It was good to have that rookie face-off last weekend, kind of get back into the flow of things again. But man, it is so exciting to hear you say that training camp is tomorrow, because you look at these dates on the calendar for so many months and it's like, it's coming, it's down the road, it's way far away. And then all of a sudden, boom, it is September. The rookie games are played and the fellas are back. So very, very exciting time.
And we're going to get into the rookie face-off with you in just a second. And it's been a little while since we had you on the show. I think last time we talked, Jim Hiller was about to be named head coach. A lot has happened between now and then. We're going to get your thoughts on several things, but let's start with the most recent happenings. And on the eve of training camp, the Kings and forward Arthur Kaliyev, who was a restricted free agent, have agreed on a one-year deal. We know he requested a trade. That obviously didn't happen. Just your thoughts on where things stand now that Artie and the Kings are going forward with him as an LA King for now.
Well, it's good to see him back around the facility. He's back in LA skating with his teammates in those informal captain skates. So nothing official yet in terms of the contract, but something's going to have to change from what happened last year, right? That situation as it existed, I don't think is tenable to continue. So if Artie's going to come back, which it certainly sounds like it's trending that way, it's got to be a clean slate. It has to be a clean slate from both player and team, because the way that it went in the second half of last year, you can't do that for a full season. It's not fair to the player, and it's not going to work for the team. It's not going to be successful for anybody. So it's got to be a clean slate. That's my understanding is how he would be coming into camp. And we'll see from there. I mean, the Kings with Kaliyev have more guys than you can keep on the NHL roster. So it changes the roster picture a bit. And he's going to be one of those guys that I'll be very interested to watch in those first couple of days of training camp. Where does he line up? Who is he playing with? How are the Kings potentially looking to deploy him?
Yeah, no doubt about that. Also recently, as you mentioned, the rookie face-off just concluded. A big event hosted by the LA Kings, not just a big event for the franchise, but for the NHL. 7 different teams involved, the biggest such event currently right now in the NHL. And hopefully we saw some future LA Kings in action. Obviously, I know you were out there. Overall takeaways from the event, any players you want to talk about? I know you had an article recently on LAKingsInsider.com. There were 3 players you were kind of focusing on.
Yeah, the number one performer for the LA Kings, in my opinion, and in Marco Sturm's opinion, was goaltender Carter George, second round pick of the Kings in 2024. He was so good. Like, he gave up 1 goal in the first game, 0 goals in the second game, played about 50 minutes in total. And the stats are whatever. The stats are fine. You watch him play, and he is so calm. He's so smooth. And he's in there as an 18-year-old against guys who are 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. And he looks like he's the oldest guy on the ice. Like, he was so impressive to watch that made me very excited about the future of Carter George, excited to see what he does in the OHL this season. Liam Greentree was a guy that a lot of people were focused on. I thought Liam Greentree had a really good weekend as well. Was talking with John Hoven from Mares Manor after game 3, and we both felt he got better as games went on, maybe a little bit slow at the start, really impressive in the second half of all 3 games. He scored in game 2. He was dangerous in games 1 and 3, even though he didn't score. First time we got to see him in a Kings jersey, and I thought that he delivered. Brandt Clarke was obviously the highest profile player there, and you could tell that his game is just levels above where most people's games were in that tournament. I don't think the tournament was all that important for him in terms of the output. Like, we know he's got bigger and better things to come during training camp, but it was just, I guess, reaffirming to see like this guy is at a different level than almost everybody on the ice. Overall, I thought there were a lot of strong individual performances. Maybe a few guys who didn't deliver exactly what you wanted to see, but these are tough games sometimes. Like, it's basically summer hockey, right? These guys aren't teammates for the bulk of the season. Their systems they're not accustomed to. Generally speaking, it was low scoring hockey, which we all know with the LA Kings we get accustomed to seeing sometimes. But for the most part, the guys you wanted to see do well did well, and that was good.
You mentioned Brandt Clarke, and he was clearly the one player involved in this for the LA Kings that is going to have an NHL role this year. I think for me, there's a lot of things I'm curious about with the Kings, but there's one definite thing I'm really excited about, and that's seeing Brandt Clarke at the NHL level. I know there's a lot of expectations, and people are going to expect him to come in right away and maybe do some special things. Maybe we should pump the brakes on that a little bit. But I think we all can see the potential and what he can be. And just your thoughts on how you think the Kings might want to utilize him this season.
His upside is so high. And a lot of times with prospects like that, we almost think, oh, they're already the upside of what they are, but they're not yet, right? Like, it's important to remember he's 21, hasn't played a ton of NHL games. I think he's going to be high event to start the year. I think he's going to do a lot of things that are going to wow you in a good way offensively. I think there's going to be some moments defensively where you might say, ooh, like, that's a goal on him. And the Kings need to allow him to work through those mistakes. They can't sit him every time he makes a mistake. He's got to roll with the highs, roll with the lows, and let him develop into an NHL player. I think to start, he'll probably be he'll be either RD2 or RD3. He'll play with Gavrikov or he'll play with Edmondson. Not sure exactly where. My gut would say probably Joel Edmondson, but I think you could see him and Spence, Gavrikov, and Edmondson interchangeable as partners. To be successful, he's got to probably play on the power play. How much exactly he plays could be something where he starts off maybe on PP2, could maybe work his way up. But his talents are in the offensive zone. Like, he's a gifted player offensively. He sees plays. He moves pucks during plays that other players don't even see, let alone execute, and he can do both. So he's really exciting. I'm really looking forward to seeing him for an extended sample size. And the Kings need to produce more offensively. There's no doubt about it. He is one guy who can help to do that from the blue line.
And Clarke, not the only young King that's going to get a chance, we think, to be a full-time NHLer this year. Talk about some of the opportunities for guys like Alex Turcotte and Akil Thomas and Samuel Fagemo.
Yeah, I think there's a good shot that all 3 of those guys are on the NHL roster. If you look at what Turcotte and Thomas did specifically at the end of the year, I think there are some encouraging signs. Akil Thomas, 7 games. He had 3 goals and 4 points. He is ready to have a chance to be an NHL player from opening night. We don't know what he is over 82 games. We've only seen that small sample size, but he was a guy who 2 or 3 years ago, he wasn't even close to this point. He's developed in Ontario. He's overcome some injuries, some adversity. He's learned to value the things in the game that aren't just the points. And now we're seeing a player who's ready to challenge for an NHL spot. I think you probably see him start maybe on the 4th line. Same with a guy like Turcotte. But those guys can both play center and wing. There should be opportunity potentially to move up in the lineup during points in the game, points in the season. We know Jim Hiller likes to move the pieces around. So I don't think the lines you see day 1 are going to be the lines you see even on day 2 or beyond. I think we're going to see a lot of movement at times. So those are guys who, like Clarke, it's important to temper expectations. I'm not expecting Akil Thomas to come in and score 20 goals, 30 goals this year. But if he can be a solid NHL player, show some of that offensive upside, I think he's someone who can increase the offensive output at the bottom of the lineup and then hopefully contribute in ways like maybe a PP2 or a penalty kill as well. With Turcotte, health is obviously the key, right? He's got to stay healthy. We got to see him play a full year. When he's on and when he's healthy, he's a good player. Like, I really like his game. He's a tenacious kind of guy, has some of that Lizotte in him, but I think the offensive upside with him is also a little bit higher. Showed he can play with better players on the wing, shown he can handle a center role lower in the lineup. So those are two guys specifically who I think should be really in the opening night lineup. It's kind of their spot to lose. And it's time. They're not 20 anymore. They're a few years later. It's time for those guys to establish themselves as full-time NHLers.
All right, up next, we're going to get into some of the new faces that have come to the Kings from outside the organization. We'll do that next year on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Well, we have something a little bit different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get 3 weeks free of a trial from NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV with a YouTube TV base plan. You'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market NFL game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. And of course, FanDuel is always there for you to bet on your favorite sports. Major League Baseball winding down. We've got college football and of course the NFL season getting going. Join FanDuel, browse the latest betting odds of your favorite sports and teams on the Sportsbook app and get in on the action. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. We continue with Kings insider Zach Dooley, also contributor to the All the Kings Men podcast with friend of the show, Jesse Cohen. I saw you guys recently had an episode talking about the greatest hockey movies. Now I'm a bit older, but there's really no debate as to what is #1, right?
I don't know. Did you listen to the podcast, or did you just look at the title?
I just looked at the title.
Well, there was some debate on what was #1. We had Isaiah Mustafa on with us for that episode. Obviously, a great guy to have to talk movies, and there was a little bit of a disconnect. 1 and 2 were the same. Top 2 were the same, but there were some with a movie at 1 and some with a movie at 2.
I'm guessing Slapshot and Miracle, or do I have to go?
Those are the two. Those are the two.
All right.
But there was not a consensus on which order those two movies were ranked.
Fair enough. So obviously coming up tomorrow, Wednesday, training camp gets underway. There's going to be several things different about this training camp and this preseason, but let's start with Jim Hiller. It's his first training camp as an NHL head coach. I know you've had a chance to talk to him since we last spoke and he got the job full time. Just thoughts on how some things might be different from a coaching standpoint as he tries to put his stamp on this team.
One thing I want to clarify too, camp opens Thursday.
Okay.
Not Wednesday. So I didn't know if this was going out on Wednesday, but camp starts Thursday for the Kings, just to set that straight. But with Jimmy, he promised change, right? If the Kings do the exact same thing that they did in past years and expect different results, that's just not going to work. The Kings will look to change things. And when Jim Hiller took over in February, it just wasn't the time to make structural changes because you can't do those kinds of things effectively with 2 practices. Now he has a full training camp. He's got 6 exhibition games, the Quebec City trip, a number of 2-a-days early in camp. This is the time to implement structural changes. And I can't sit here and say I know exactly which those changes will be, but the Kings will make changes to the way that they play the game. They know that they need to score more goals, but they're not going to just open it up entirely and sacrifice all that they've built defensively to chase more offense. Otherwise, we'll get more of those Seattle Kraken 9-8 games that I think drove Todd McClellan up a wall. So the Kings will do things a little bit differently in hopes of getting more offensive opportunities from high danger areas. They'll look to convert those into goals. And I'm pretty excited to see structurally how that impacts things like, do they still run the 1-3-1? How do they forecheck? How do they do different things to try and create more offense without just becoming a straight up run and gun team?
Well, one of the more exciting changes we're looking at is Quinton Byfield moving back to his natural center position. Obviously, Q made a big jump last season in his production. What are we looking for now that he's moving back into the middle?
The Kings need Quinton Byfield to drive a line. He was very effective with Anze Kopitar and Adrian Kempe. I think we all saw how good that line was when they played together. But Byfield didn't have to drive that line. There were 3 guys who could drive that line. They need Quinton to now move into the middle and drive another scoring line. Because if you can go Kopitar, Deneau, Byfield down the middle in whatever order, and all three of those guys are capable of pulling their own line, then you have depth. That is what the Kings wanted to do last season with Dubois, but obviously Dubois didn't work out. So they're trying it again with Quinton Byfield. I wouldn't be surprised if Byfield plays with Kevin Fiala, maybe Warren Fogle as the third member on that line. That could be a really exciting offensive line. And I think that Byfield's potential and ceiling for me is so high. And I think to realize that he has to play center, which is his natural position. So I'm excited to see how he can drive play positively through the middle of the ice. It's going to be a bigger challenge for him for sure than playing on the wing. I think that the challenge, the process is going to be harder for him this year. So I think the numbers he posted last year, meeting them is probably not what you want to see. You want to see him exceed them, but also drive his own line to where the Kings can dictate matchups in a way that they couldn't do last year when they only had the two centers in that way.
Looking at maybe some position battles in camp, would the biggest one be who's going to replace Byfield on the top line with Kopitar and Kempe?
I think that's fair to say. I'd look at like Alex Laferriere as probably the first option there, but all those guys you mentioned earlier should have a crack, right? You talk about Kaliyev, Fagemo, Turcotte, Thomas. If the Kings want to go with a younger player there, I think all of those players will have an opportunity to earn that spot. I think Laferriere has to be the leader in the clubhouse, played 81 games out of 82 his rookie year. I think there is a lot more offense in Alex Laferriere than we saw last year. I think he's a guy who could score 20 goals. I know he's focused heavily on his shot in the offseason in hopes of producing a little bit more. He's a player that I like personally, but I also think he could slot in on any of the top three lines, even the fourth line, and find a way to be effective. He has that versatility to his game. So I could see Warren Fogle being in that spot. You could Tanner Jeannot even play in that spot. There's a lot of guys who could play in that spot. But the difference is, and I was just talking about this with Jesse this morning for an upcoming All the Kings Men episode, is last year in camp, you knew exactly who was going to be in that spot, right? It's Quinton Byfield. This year, not only do we not know who it is, but whoever fills that spot, we don't have a track record of what they've done in that spot. So that makes it a little bit more of an unknown for this team. Someone is going to step up and ultimately take that role. I personally think it will be Laferriere, but someone's going to have to step up and earn it and then prove that they deserve to keep it because they don't have the track record that a Byfield, Kopitar, Kempe line did. And that to me is a pretty big difference between where the Kings were at last year and where they are this year going into camp.
Of the new faces that are not a goalie, you mentioned Warren Fogle and Tanner Jeannot. You also have Joel Edmondson on defense. Who would you say you're most interested in seeing kind of how they fit in and maybe the role they have with the Kings?
For me, it's Fogle. I'm a big proponent of 5-on-5 scoring to kind of judge players. And Fogle was fourth on the Oilers last year in 5-on-5 scoring. And the names in front of him were McDavid, Draisaitl, and Nugent Hopkins, or it was Hyman. So ahead of one of those guys, like that's pretty impressive on a team that had a lot of guns. I think Fogle has the versatility of an Alex Iafallo, where he can play with multiple different positions, multiple different players, and be successful. I think he's a fast play driver. He does most of his damage at even strength. I think of those guys, he's the underrated acquisition. I think he's probably the best contract that the Kings signed or acquired this summer. I think he could be a really, really good player for this team. So I'm really excited to kind of see how he plays more than just against the Kings and see how he kind of fits in with this group.
And in net, you've got Darcy Kemper coming over, a former King rejoining the organization. Any word on how the Kings expect to use him? Is he going to be the number one going into camp? Are we going to see a tandem situation with David Riddick? What are you hearing about that?
On paper, I'd say he's the number one going into camp, but it's not a 1-2. It's probably more of a tandem split. I think David Riddick had a really nice year last year, and he's earned the right to be more than just a backup. And he's going to battle for starts. One thing that I've found with the Kings is even if you say, yeah, Kemper has the track record, he's probably the quote unquote one. The goalie who's stopping the puck, the goalie who's winning games is going to play more. I don't think the Kings will have any hesitation in turning to Riddick for more starts if Riddick's play dictates those starts. We saw it in the playoffs. Kings were not shy about putting Riddick into games 4 and 5. We saw it a lot down the stretch. Riddick played a lot of games under Jim Hiller. So I think Kemper probably has the leg up. He's the veteran. He's the cup winner. He has more of that established track record, but I don't think it's going to be clear starter backup. I think both guys will play, and I think there will be an extent of hot hand dictates who gets more of the starts at different points in the year.
And real quick, do we have a Phoenix Copley update coming off the knee surgery? Is he ready to go for training camp?
My expectation is yes, that he is. Expecting him to be out there, though, with those types of injuries, a serious knee injury, you always got to kind of see how a guy does in that situation first. But my expectation is, yeah, he'll be out there for day one.
All right. Well, Kings training camp in the preseason will have a bit of a different look this year. We're not talking about the players on the ice. We'll get into that next year on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Hey, those of us that live here in LA, so lucky we have an opportunity to go to so many live events, sports for sure, but there's also going to the theater. You can go to concerts, and no matter what you're into, you need to use Gametime for all your ticket needs. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks. It makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. You can get Dodger tickets for less than $40, LAFC tickets for less than $25. Go to the Gametime app, download it, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. All right, we are continuing with the LA Kings insider, Zach Dooley. And Zach, no trip to Australia this preseason, but the Kings are headed out of the country again. They're going to Quebec for part of training camp in the preseason due to the renovations going on at Crypto.com Arena. Not going to be hosting any preseason games in LA. Just your thoughts on how this is going to be a different kind of a preseason for the Kings.
It's funny because last year could not have been more different than any other preseason, and this one not quite as hectic as last year, but still a little bit different. The Kings will have one home game in Ontario, which is good. I think that game's pretty close to sold out. Tickets selling really well, so that's really exciting. The Kings will have kind of that home support there. But it's interesting because it's not just the Quebec City trip. It's really almost a 20-day road trip because the Kings will fly to Quebec at the beginning of October. They'll play those two games, but they're going to stay on the East Coast between the Quebec City games and the start of the regular season. Part of those games is that the Kings will open with 5 straight road games against Eastern Conference opposition. You don't see that very often where a team starts the season game 1 playing across the country. But because of those Quebec games, it made a lot of sense to get rid of a flight and a trip later in the year and just start the season on the East Coast. So the Kings will go Buffalo, Boston, and then the 3 Canadian teams, Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal in a different order than I mentioned, I think. But that makes it very different. And I'll be interested to see what does the roster look like going to Quebec, because there's still going to be about a week left of training camp at that point. Still 2 games to kind of determine final roster spots. So it won't just be 23 guys. I'd imagine there'll be a little bit bigger of a group going to Quebec as those final position battles kind of sort themselves out. Unique camp for sure. Not 17 hours away like Australia, but still a little bit different than pretty much any other year.
And is that 7-game road trip to start the season, is that also because of what's going on in crypto, or is that just how the schedule worked out this year?
I thought of it as how the schedule worked out. They're going to Quebec for sure because of the crypto renovations, but it made just sense to stay there. You might be right. I honestly didn't think about it like that, but the new scoreboard already installed at Crypto, which is really, really cool. I know it's been used for LA Sparks games already. Massive upgrade. The old scoreboard had to go. The indoor-outdoor terrace on the upper deck should be really cool. Excited to see that actually in person. I haven't had the chance to see Crypto during the renovations, but it's a good point. It might be partially due to that, but I know for sure the Quebec City games are a result of the Crypto renovations.
And for you personally, still going to be a part of the pregame coverage in the arena and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, they still put me on. I guess they haven't found a better option yet, but I think I'm back for another year.
And any changes or things that we should look forward to for this season with LAKingsInsider.com?
Nothing definitively yet. We will certainly have a couple of things that should be new this year for LA Kings Insider. We're also with the Kings looking at launching a couple of additional podcasts. Very different than all the Kings men, focusing not really on the team day to day, but different parts of the organization and the sporting community in LA. So hope to have some more information on those within the next month. But that should be really exciting to give Jesse some more work to do between his shows.
Well, I'm not going to ask you for any kind of a prediction on the Kings, but of course, looking to make the playoffs for a fourth straight year. I think for me, going into this season, I have a lot of just genuine curiosity as to how all these changes are going to work out. The younger players coming in, the guys from the outside, a new head coach. I'm really just intrigued to see how it all comes together. Kind of your overall thoughts or your opinions on something you're looking at going into the season?
There are more questions for sure about this year's team than we had in years past. I don't think the ceiling is necessarily lower, but I think there are more questions that have to be answered in a positive way to get to that point. More questions that we don't know the answers to until we see how they unfold during camp and throughout the season, really. I think that this team should be where they were last year in terms of the end result. That should be where they're kind of aspiring to. I think you look at the Pacific Division, Edmonton is really good. Vegas is pretty good. Vancouver, one really strong year, but they haven't proven they can do it over consecutive years. But for the Kings to be back in that mix, they have to answer those questions. I think the number one storyline for me is Quinton Byfield in the middle. Does that move work as it's intended to? Can the younger players step up as they are hoped to? And does the style of the players that were acquired, that bigger, more physical, uncomfortable, to use Rob Blake's word, style, does it work? We don't know. We don't know how these guys play as Kings. We don't know how they gel together as a group. We don't know how it's going to mesh. The Kings obviously believe in what they're doing, but we haven't seen proof of concept that it's going to work. So I think that it can for sure. I think that if it comes together as designed, it's a better team, but there are a lot more pieces to get to that point. And we don't know the answer to those questions yet. So how it all comes together, does it work as planned, for me will determine ultimately where the Kings wind up.
He is the LA Kings Insider, LAKingsInsider.com. You can follow him on Twitter at Dooley, LAK, DOOLEY. And we always appreciate him making some time for us. Great information. Zach, really excited for another season to get going. I know you're ready to get going as well. So great to have you on. We'll have you on again during the season, but good stuff. And we'll see you out at crypto.com arena here in the near future.
For sure, Eddie. Thanks again.
Thank you very much. All right, guys. Hope you guys appreciated that interview, and we always appreciate Zach's time. I'm glad he corrected me on training camp, so that's going to adjust a little bit of what we have coming forward for the rest of the week. I think we're going to have another special interview on Wednesday. Then Thursday, we will get into the first day of Kings training camp. And of course, Friday, we'll have the Kings fan feedback show as always. If you want to get in on that, the email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com. Always leave your comments if you're watching on YouTube in the comments section. Stay interactive with the show on social media, X, Twitter, Instagram at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you as always for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you tomorrow. And as always, go Kings, go.